Established on June 1, 2001, the Ghana Lands and Surveys Commission is responsible for land administration, the execution of surveys, as well as land information and mapping. The agency, which falls under the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment, also provides a wide range of support services that play a critical role in land use and development across the country. This week on Dorado Shines, we will take a closer look at the operations of the Ghana Lands and Surveys Commission and how the agency administers what is considered to be one of the country's most important resources, land.
The Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission was created in June 2001 through an Act of Parliament to administer land, to maintain a land and tax register, to increase land use, to maintain a land information system, and to provide surveying and geographic information system services.
To tell us a little more about its role, here are the agency's Commissioner, Durga Prasad, and its Senior Land Administration Officer, Michael Hudson.
Being the guardian or custodian of all public lands in Guyana, that will be state and government lands, the Commission receives applications for lands, and those applications are processed. A detailed process is actually taking place, and it goes through the detailed process takes place, and a lease is eventually issued, which gives ownership to persons who are clients of the Commission to use the lands for various purposes, agricultural, residential, and such like commercial as well too. Also, it's responsible for looking at the survey aspect of the Commission, that mandate that is given to it. And it has mapping responsibility as well. It's the mapping authority in Guyana. Those are the three main areas of responsibilities.
Initially, we were responsible for forestry, lands, and mining. That's under the Lands Department Act that was instituted in the 18th century. But by 1970, forestry became a commission, geology and mines became a commission, housing was responsible for urban development, residential purpose. So lands and surveys is now only responsible mainly for agriculture, industrial, commercial, and other business activities, right? So we issue titles for those categories of land.
New litter prevention regulations will come on stream from March 2014. Stop littering. Do the right thing. Processing of applications for public lands begins at regional offices. Clients are usually referred to the relevant regional office for initial communication and transactions concerning application within that particular region.
The processing and issuance of public lands form an important aspect of the agency's day-to-day operations. Members of the public applying for such lands must go through a process and meet certain requirements before their application is approved.
For a person to actually apply and get access to land, first of all, an expression of interest would have to be submitted to the Commissioner. And that expression of interest is a written expression of interest, and that is put into the system, in the land administration system. And when that is put into the land, it is subject to a detailed processing, which includes inspection of the land on the ground for the clients to say whether they appreciate it or they don't, and whether they would like to do a formal application for it. A formal application is a written kind of application with forms to fill out, and that goes through a further process into what is known as a processing unit. When we're satisfied that all the various requirements are met for us to send it for final approval, we put it on a schedule, and that is sent to the Office of the President, and the Office of the President approves that. May reject it or ask to put it on hold and ask for further investigations on it.
An individual who wishes to obtain a title to public lands, state or government, is required to indicate to the Commission of Lands and Surveys by way of a letter his interest to obtain a title to that land. Now, in that letter, under Section 2 of the State Lands Regulation made under State Lands Act of 1903, that person must state on whose behalf the application is being made, the amount of land, the situation of the land, where the land is located, and the kind of activity that he wishes to engage on the land.
Processing of such applications is a twofold exercise that occurs first at the regional offices and secondly at the head office in Georgetown.
When that application is forwarded to the Commissioner of Lands and Surveyors, he will forward it to the respective region in which the person requests the land, right? The head of that region, or senior land development officer in each region, is responsible for replying to the applicant, acknowledging receipt of their indication of interest to lease state lands, and asking them to come to the local office to see the area that we have available.
New litter prevention regulations will take effect from March 2014. A person who transports along a public place any material that is likely to fall off or blow off shall be guilty of an offence. In the case of an individual, the penalty will be a fine of $50,000, or in the case of a business, a fine of $100,000. Stop littering. Do the right thing. A message from the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment.
The agency is also continuously working to expedite the process to ensure that applicants get a speedy response.
The application process, we aim to finish the application in 3 months, which is 90 days, right? 1 month notice for local stakeholders in the region, 2 weeks to execute the field inspection and filing of the application, and the other 6 weeks for processing at the head office and submission to the minister. But a point to note is that we don't have full control over the regional stakeholders or approval from the minister. So depending on how long those two processes take, that will determine how quick the title is prepared and issued to the client.
One of the challenges facing the agency in the issuance of public lands is the presence of squatters in several locations across the country. The Ghana Lands and Surveys Commission has been paying keen attention to this and is moving to work with squatters in an effort to reclaim public lands.
Some of the challenges we have, one would include the issue of squatting on lands, because many people squat on lands, and so if they have extensive squatting, that prevents us from actually making lands available to legitimate persons who apply for them.
There was a period when allocations were done to individuals for land. So they would get an allocation, go onto the land, start to develop the land, live on it, farm on it, and so on, but no farmer title was issued to them. And that happened for a number of years. But in 2001, when the Lands and Surveys Commission was formed, we had a project called the Land Tenure Regularization Project, which sought to cure that defect in title, right? So that project was responsible for issuing titles to individuals in the land development scheme, such as Hague, the Jealousy, Winter Forest, Black Bush Polder, Garden of Eden, just to name a few, right? So the project issued over 8,000 titles a year to individuals, and the project lasted for about 5 years, right? 8 to 10,000 titles. So in excess of 40,000 titles were issued. So at the end of 2005, when the Land Tenure Regularization Project was completed, Lands and Surveys now started to enforce the state lands regulation.
New litter prevention regulations will take effect from March 2014. Owners of public transportation shall provide in a convenient place one or more receptacles for litter. The penalty for failure to provide this is a fine of $15,000. Stop littering. Do the right thing. A message from the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment.
Under the directive of the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment, the agency is taking steps to reclaim public lands and provide alternative locations and options for squatters.
We have decided to issue notices to the squatters to vacate the lands, and then there are detailed procedures that would need to be followed in dealing with the squatting itself, which could include demolition of buildings and repossession of the land. The Commission has had several outreach programs in various parts of the country, including the Suzdaikel-Linden Highway. We have not had one in the Port Kaituma area, but our approach in terms of these outreaches is to listen to the people and to hear what it is that they would have to say in relation to them being squatters on the land, and to encourage them that perhaps they can come into the Lands and Surveys Commission and make an application for land, and if we are not in a position to grant them the land in the specific location, we can think about alternative locations that we can make available to them.
Efforts to resolve this issue in some areas has seen individuals visiting the agency seeking alternative lands.
We've been trying to work with them in terms of making some lands available to them at alternative locations. It's not an easy process, however, when someone squats on a particular piece of land, and we have set up a structure to get them to remove from there, because some of the structure may be permanent concrete structure which would be difficult to relocate to elsewhere.
Another issue engaging the attention of the Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission is the non-payment of rent by leaseholders. The agency will be moving in 2014 to address this concern.
It is important for lessees to pay their rent because it's their obligation, as is stated in their lease that they would have received. Now, the rental rates, they're very low. For residential purposes, it's $3,600, and for agricultural lease, it's $1,000 per acre annually. What we find is that there are a lot of defaulters out there who are not paying their leases. So for 2014, what we plan to do is to work on our enforcement that lessees should come in and pay their leases. We have an unsurmountable amount that is outstanding. I don't know if we can recover it all, but we were encouraging lessees to come in and pay, because without the revenue, we cannot execute the mandate at the Lands and Survey Commission. What we find is that most times when persons require a service or request a service from Guyana Lands and Survey Commission, then is when they will come in and pay off their outstanding rent, because they need, for example, if they're going for a mortgage or something, then they would come and pay off the rent.
The Commission is taking steps to address this issue, which, among other measures, has seen defaulters being written to.
We're sending out letters to defaulters for them to come in and pay. I know it's been happening in the regional offices, and we're starting it this year at the head office. We have regional offices in all the administrative regions except region 8 and 5, so persons can go into any one of the regions and pay for their leases.
Payment of rent allows the Commission to carry out its mandate effectively, which ultimately benefits the population through land distribution and development.
One of our main mandate is poverty eradication. That is what we're aiming for through the Commission. And without the necessary revenues coming in, then we cannot fulfill that mandate. The thing is, it's a benefit for the entire country, it's a benefit for our nation, and I think that lessees and the persons who have a part to play should play their part in ensuring that our country moves to a next level.
I always encourage the passengers not to throw garbage out of the window.
Stop littering. Do the right thing. The urgent need for a national land use policy is recognized by the government of Guyana, and it is hoped that the plan could act as a catalyst to speed the finalization of this policy and the development of integrated land use planning in Guyana.
The increased pressure on land resources in the coastal plain has made the development of a land use policy and plan crucial. The absence of a policy and plan was seen to create land use conflicts, which then had serious implications for the sustainable use of natural resources. In this regard, a national land use plan was developed in 2013 to guide the use, management, and development of land. One of the main objectives of this plan is to enable financial resources to be targeted at optimal land uses at the regional level.
The rationale for the preparation of the National Land Use Plan was to reduce land pressure on the coast and to move development away from the coast. That is in terms of climate change adaptation. The coastline of Guyana has 90% of the population, and it is also below sea level. So the plan provides options for different parts of Guyana in terms of various land uses.
By 2030, flooding has been estimated to cost $150 million annually, and extreme events such as the flooding of 2005 could result in $0.8 billion in losses, affecting 320,000 people. The need to identify and develop land away from the coastal plain has been included in the Low Carbon Development Strategy as hinterland adaptation measures to be undertaken in the period 2012 to 2015.
The National Land Use Plan also takes into consideration key factors such as climate change, adaptation, and a need to develop land away from the coastal plain.
The LCDS estimates that 39% of the population, producing 43% of the GDP, live in the regions exposed to flooding. So the National Land Use Plan will be useful for the hinterland adaptation measures in terms of it looks at where you can now develop areas in the hinterland for persons to go and live there. Also for commercial activities, industrial, and other use of resources, for instance mining and fishery, forestry resources.
Guyana is making more lands and resources available for mineral production and investments in the natural resources sector. These initiatives are being pursued in keeping with the country's commitment to protect the environment.
We must do everything we can to keep our surroundings clean.
Stop littering. Do the right thing. The Protected Areas Commission was established to manage Guyana's National Protected Areas system. Currently, protected areas cover approximately 8.5% or 18,388 square kilometers of Guyana's landmass.
Why is it are we meeting here on the last day of January? And it is, from my perspective, and I want this to be collective, it's not necessarily what the minister, the government wants, but what all of us in this room want. And that is for us to understand from each other the day-to-day issues that we face, for us to have a firmer appreciation of the challenges as well as the issues and the opportunities that we encounter in our respective area, be it in the natural resource side or on the environmental management side. And looking at how it is having, at the end of the day, we hope a better appreciation, how it is that we can work together, supporting each other, looking at recommendations, one of the recommendations by Major General in terms of looking at synergies and support and better collaboration, how it is together we can have those matters addressed. Historically, and I've always rejected this notion that there cannot be any, as it were, any symbiotic, any close collaboration, close interplay between natural resources development and environmental management. And the traditional view for many years is always seen as two competing interests. And perhaps in some jurisdiction and the old thinking and teaching in this regard might have in some way justified that thinking. But in Guyana's setting and in our own unique arrangements that we have, we cannot afford to have, as it were, this perpetual conflict, but rather how it is that at the end of the day we can bring about closer synergies, and where one perhaps complements the other, and rather than we see them as opposing sides, standoff, and natural resources versus environmental management cannot be, and we cannot afford to do that if we're going to talk about our country's development and we talk about prosperity. And then that brings me back to what is our country's developmental strategy, developmental outlook. And the relevant documents that have spoken to our outlook in terms of strategic development nationally have been the National Development Strategy, talking about the revised version, and more recently, the Low Carbon Development Strategy. And those speak directly to issues that concerns the issues that relate to natural resources and environmental management. But then there are also some associated national strategic documents which directly and some indirectly speak to the outlook of the sector. We can talk about the National Competitiveness Strategy, because that looks at the business aspect, and a lot of those cover activities that relate to the natural resources sector. Or we can also talk about our poverty reduction strategy, which in fact looked at ways in which we can bring down the rate of poverty, bring about or accelerate social and economic development. Again, those really, if we go back to those fundamental documents, and I encourage all of us to do that from time to time, it will allow us to appreciate better the strategic focus on where we're going and where we ought to go. Because these documents too did not fall out of thin air. They came about from extensive national consultations. Extensive, covering perhaps nearly every community in our country, and covering all stakeholders. And then they were also benefited from references, be it international, from expert groups, NGOs, and married entities in and out of our country. And so they represent a body of work, but also, more importantly, the collective will of our people where we want to go. Because no strategy or no outlook will make sense or will be able to implement if these do not gel, if these do not respond to the aspirations of our people. And so, as not only as decision makers, but as managers and technical officers, it is important that we, from time to time, reference and look at these documents. And I'm happy to say that in a major way, the work that we have been doing in the natural resources and in the environment sector have been consistent with the approaches that have been promulgated. Some may talk about targets, some may say about the outlines of these documents. We've been able to be consistent in our implementation. And we have not found so far any substantial deviation from the earlier documentation, as well, or the earlier strategy document, as well as the most latest in this regard. And that is very important. And it is comforting so that we all recognize that we are, as it were, staying the course in terms of the development our country based on the aspirations of our leaders, be it political leaders, social leaders, economic leaders, but also of our people, which is much more important in terms of where do we take instruction and guidance from. So that is the first point I wanted, but the second point I wanted to make. The first being that we need to constantly and consistently reference and to see where we are in relation to these documents. And even if things have moved on, take for instance the National Development Strategy spoke up to 2010, and some of the targets that we had, whether it's on the forestry side, the mining side, the environmental management aspects, or even new areas of the economy, using the environment as the base. And if we looked at, one may say that perhaps the document itself needs to be updated, but I make the point that the low carbon development strategy, in a way, takes the baton from 2010 and is moving forward in this regard in terms of our outlook. So it is not that we are lacking a development framework. It's not that there's a hiatus and there's a gap in terms of our strategic outlook. And with the other document, which take for instance the National Competitiveness Strategy, where it is co-managed and it is co-led and co-implemented by the private sector. That's an arrangement where a model that has come about where, as it were, 50-50 ownership. And 50-50 ownership not only in terms of the ideas contained therein, but also 50-50 ownership in terms of rolling it out. So those documents, even if the time frame set, we must constantly look in terms of ensuring that we're consistent, and we have been. Secondly, in terms of our targets, and continuing to apply, where relevant, where necessary, the instruments and the ideas and the outlook contained in those documents.
Welcome to Guyana, the gateway to South America. A pristine haven of abundant natural resources. We are a nation born in sacrifice and enriched by our togetherness. When we play, we celebrate every effort. When we celebrate, we salute more than success. We exude our right to move forward.
New litter prevention regulations will come on stream from March 2014. Ensure you play your part by helping to stop the dumping of garbage in canals and on parapets. Stop littering and do the right thing. Guyana is making more lands and resources available for mineral production and investments in the natural resources sector. These initiatives are being pursued in keeping with the country's commitment to protect the environment.
You've been watching Dorado Shines. Do join us again next week for another program. Until then, remember, we all have a role to play in protecting the environment.